You're born into this anti-white poison, just like a deep sea fish is born into the ocean. You don't know that you are in water.
This is a good example of the anti-white narrative. The article is titled as follows: Dark skin and blue eyes. European hunter-gatherers did not fit the common representation. So again, this is a really good example of the anti-white narrative. Fundamentally, there was some genetics found that correlate with other genetics when in a cluster in correlation with other genetics which weren't found, create or are suspected to create the darker pigmentations of skin colours within human populations. If you understand how genetics works, DNA, then you understand that this is just anti-white nonsense. Fundamentally, there isn't any specific gene that does any specific thing, okay? So it's not like there's a gene for this colour skin, or a gene for this colour eyes, okay? There's genes in clusters, okay, so in groups. You have one gene, it's called the sky. You have another gene called sun. You have another gene called landscape or horizon. Another gene called mountains. And when they cluster together, so when all of those genes are together, they create the image, okay, the genetic or the biological expression, the organism, okay, so they create a phenomena within an organism. For example, it's hair color or eye color or skin color, etc., and so on. Any type of trait or behavior whatsoever, okay. So, but if we take these same genes, so you have this cluster of genes. Again, one gene is called the sky, another gene is the sun. So you've got the sky, you've got the sun, you've got another gene which is called the landscape or the horizon, all right? And another gene called mountains. You put that all together, you have a nice landscape image. You've got some mountains, you've got the horizon there, you've maybe a sunset or a sunrise, all right? And the sun is obviously in the sky, which is above the horizon, which the mountains you can see on the horizon. So you have a good image there, all right? That's the biological expression, which is created through a cluster of genes. But if you have genes, okay, so the exact same gene, so we take the sun gene out of that cluster, and we have it in another cluster found in some other organism, okay, or another race of people or something, all right? And you have the sun gene, and you have the solar system gene, and the stars gene, and the space gene. Then what do you have? You have something completely different. You don't have a landscape image with mountains and horizon and the sky, like we're sitting on Earth looking at the sunrise or the sunset. No, if you have the sun gene with the space gene and the star genes, then you've got a universe. You've got a solar system, space, right? Which is a lot different from looking at a sunrise or a sunset. So in the exact same way, with your genetics and your DNA, if one gene is found in one race of people, for example, and another gene, that same gene is found in another race of people, but it's in a different cluster of genes, it will have a completely different outcome and effect. So just because one gene is found somewhere, it means absolutely nothing. You cannot determine anything from that, and anyone who says that you can simply does not understand basic science of genes, DNA, this basic understanding of biology. All right, and so they're running with misunderstandings and creating confusion, and then as well just peddling anti-white lies. So essentially, people have found that they found a gene in some old European and archaeological findings, right? So people that lived in Europe thousands and thousands of years ago, and they found one gene in these people, in these remains, that's also a gene in modern day people who have dark skin. So they're just going to run with it, even though, as we just went over, and again, if you have the sun gene with the sky, the mountains, the horizon, then you have a landscape. You have, like, we're on Earth, we're looking at a sunrise or a sunset. But if you take that exact same sun gene and you put it in with other different genes in a different cluster, like stars and empty space and asteroids, well then guess what? We're not looking at a sunrise or a sunset. We're looking at out in the universe, out in the Milky Way. Just because the sun is involved in both doesn't mean that they're both going to look exactly the same or be the exact same expression. So in the same way, these scientists have found one gene which is in correlation in a cluster, like this, the sun in our metaphor, in our analogy, right? The sun gene. They found this sun gene, and so then they're saying, well, that means these ancient people who were found in Europe, ancient ancestors of white Europeans, because they found the sun gene, all right? Again, metaphorically, following our metaphor, our analogy, they found the sun gene. So that means these ancient European ancestors must have black skin. They must. So it's, even though there's also perhaps, say, some star genes in there, and we'll just ignore all of that. Pretend we're not looking at a solar system. We're not looking at the Milky Way. We're looking at a sunrise, and ancestors of white people had black skin. So, haha, Whitey, you actually used to be black. So we can erase your people. Doesn't matter if we replace you, erase your kind, harm you, make your children suffer until we erase you from existence, because you used to be black anyway. Haha. So this is a really good example of the anti-white narrative, how anti-whiteism works. Okay. And now folk will just run with anything. They'll grasp at anything in order to try to peddle the anti-white narrative, to promote white erasure, anti-whiteism, the abuse of innocent white children, and ultimately our complete erasure. The article goes on to say, open quote, "The popular image of the light-skinned European hunter-gatherer is not correct." So, like I said, they're straight away trying to attack our race, say that our race is less than human. They want to dehumanize us, say that, oh no, we never used to exist back in the day. We used to be darker skinned, we used to be this and that, and so if we get erased now, it doesn't matter. Exactly as I was saying, this is the anti-white narrative. Very good example of the anti-white narrative. Why else would you start off with so-called scientific findings? All right, this is supposed to be science. This is supposed to be higher education, academia. And they start off an article about the findings of genetics in archaeological findings, right? With the sentence, "The popular image of light-skinned European hunter-gatherer, or of the light-skinned European hunter-gatherer, is not correct." So, the sentence doesn't start off with, "Oh, an interesting archaeological find has been made. Research has been done on this study," or different research and study groups have worked together to peer review data found in regards to this finding. But no, nothing like this. It's straight away an anti-white attack, an attack on the white race as a whole, like a haha, gotcha, you dumb white cunts. The popular image of light-skinned European hunter-gatherers, it's not correct, haha. Fuck you, Whitey. Alright, so this is supposed to be a scientific article written by so-called scientists. And they started off by saying, "Fuck you, white man. Haha." Again, isn't this a great, perfect, a beautiful example of anti-whiteism? And how prevalent anti-whiteism is in the world today. So-called scientists are writing scientific articles, and they started out with the first sentence saying, "Fuck you, white man. Fuck you, white people. Haha. You scum because you got white skin. Fuck you, haha." And these are scientists. But again, it makes perfect sense if you understand anti-whiteism, because that's where anti-whiteism is predominantly promoted in higher education. You go to university, you're going to be taught anti-whiteism. All right, they're not going to call it that. They'll call it feminism and social studies and all this nonsense. but it's actually, they're just teaching you anti-whiteism. All right. So it's quite common that academia type folk who work in universities, etc., higher education individuals, they are very anti-white, indoctrinated in the anti-white narrative. The article goes on to say, DNA taken from a 7,000-year-old wisdom tooth found in Spain in 2006 shows a different story. See, again, if this wasn't just an anti-white attack, those two sentences would be reversed. The article would start off talking about DNA taken from a 7,000-year-old wisdom tooth found in Spain in 2006, and might even mention the team of archaeologists who discovered it, or the individual person who discovered it. But it doesn't bother to go into any detail like that. Anyway, and then it would say, has given us new information which may change what we currently think of the world. That's how true science works. Even if it's especially if it's a recent discovery, they just pulled it out of the ground a couple of years ago and started doing tests on it. So any information, any revelation that comes out from such studies is supposed to be taken with a grain of salt. It's not automatic like, oh, we'll throw everything else in the bin, we found this. So everything else that was correct for the past 2,000 years, fuck it, burn all the books. No, that's not how science works. But if you're in the anti-white narrative and you want to promote anti-whiteism, not scientific facts, that is how it works. Isn't it? You want to jump to an anti-white conclusion and white erase history. Alright? But that's not how real science works. Again, it would be DNA taken from a 7,000-year-old wisdom tooth found in Spain by this team of archaeologists, run by this leader, this individual. Okay, perhaps funded by these institutions and non-profit organisations, etc. Give some actual credit there for the team who made the discovery. Shows a different story to what, or may perhaps change our mind and show a different story to what we thought was correct. But we still can't know because we're open-minded, we're trying to be scientific here. So in 5 or 10 years' time, this same data, the studies that we're doing on this same piece of archaeological finding, this wisdom tooth, might actually change, and we might get different data. It's got to be peer-reviewed, it's got to be sent to a different lab on a different country. They got to check it, and then if we got the same findings, then it's all correct, sweet as. We still got to peer-review it all, we still got to make sure it's all correct, so we don't actually know yet. Alright? And again, in 5-10 years' time, something could come out that makes this incorrect, so this is still just a theory. Nobody actually knows. Right? Perhaps ancient European peoples had darker skin than we think. That's how you'd be scientific about it. But again, that's still a stretch and not really being scientific, because you'd say, we found a gene that correlates in a cluster in modern humans which creates darker pigmentation of skin, so dark skin color. We found one of those genes from a cluster in a different cluster with different genes in this wisdom tooth. So that actually means, being scientific and honest, that ancient Europeans probably didn't have dark skin, because it's not the same cluster of genes. It's only one of the genes. So it's probably going to do completely different, and it might even make them have white skin. So that same gene in modern black people today will make them have black skin, but that same gene in ancient European might be the reason they have white skin. Because that's how genes work sometimes. That would be the honest way to put across this finding, if you wanted to be scientific. But obviously, they want to white erase history. They want to jump to an anti-white conclusion, which they do with the first sentence, with saying, fuck you, whitey, haha, gotcha. Alright, your ancestors used to be dark skinned, haha, screw you, you white dogs. Alright, that's how they jump into it. And then they say, oh, and you're a white scumbag dog because we hate you because we're anti-whites. And also, we found this tooth, and there was a gene in the tooth, and maybe that gene's correlated, so fuck you, white man, haha. That's how modern science works, folks. That's why we haven't had any progress in the past, say, 60 years, maybe even longer. That's why we haven't been back to the moon since the 60s. That's why everything around you is falling apart. Nothing's being repaired, nothing's being rebuilt. That's why back when my parents were my age, it was predicted that we'd all have flying cars by now. But instead, we've got pedophile bankers who have private islands raping children. Thanks to anti-whiteism. A study of the tooth shows that the man who owned it had dark hair, blue eyes, and the dark-skinned genes of an African. So this is exactly like how I was explaining, okay? Why don't they actually know the skin tone? Because you can't know anything from finding a gene. It doesn't tell you anything. So they don't know. They don't know nothing. They haven't found nothing. But they want to emphasize, okay, again, a study of the tooth shows that the man who owned it had dark hair, blue eyes, and the dark skin genes, which are the same genes found in modern African people. Not the same clusters of genes working together to create the same biological expression. So the skin color, the hair color, the eye color, just the gene by itself, which tells you absolutely nothing and means absolutely nothing. So, a study of the tooth shows that the man who owned it had some random genes that are the same genes as some random people today have, but that tells us absolutely nothing. So why even bring it up? To promote anti-whiteism. That's right. So again, why haven't we gone back to the moon? Anti-whiteism. Exactly. Why are people dumb as fuck these days? Anti-whiteism. Exactly. Okay? To the point where actual scientists themselves don't even understand their own field of science as well as someone like Raymond Foster understands it. Why? Because I understand anti-whiteism. They're living in the anti-white narrative, so they're blind to reality. They're insane. They can't see the world around them. They only see the anti-white narratives. The anti-white narrative. They're the meme pathogens, anti-white meme pathogens, which are inside their own head. And inside their own insane heads, their own crazy anti-white perceptions of the world, okay? White people don't exist. That's an anti-white meme pathogen. White people aren't a unique people, different from other peoples. Another anti-white meme pathogen. So some random genes are found which actually tell us absolutely nothing, and even some of the scientists themselves get confused because they live in the anti-white narrative and they think it might mean that white people actually had dark skin. Whoa, we might have actually had dark skin. We're like Africans, man. Cool. I always wanted to be black. Cool. Okay? So subconsciously, anti-whiteism is hindering their ability to even partake in scientific progress, scientific understanding, scientific study. So even the world's greatest scientists are dumb as fuck compared to someone like myself because they're living in the anti-white narrative, which makes them dumb as fuck. Actually insane dumb. Not just dumb, but crazy dumb. Loopy. They can't even see the world around them. So they find genetics and they think it means this when it actually means absolutely nothing. But they don't want to lie, so they just have to throw in that statement. A study of the tooth shows the man who owned it had dark hair, blue eyes, and the dark skin genes of an African. Again, not the clusters of genetics which create the biological expression, so we don't actually know if it created any skin color or anything. Right? Like I mentioned before, the same gene in a black person today that gives them black skin, That gene by itself, in combination with other genes in a white person, might give them white skin. So that's how genes actually work. And they admit this when they say those scientists don't know what the person's exact skin tone was. So they're very, very vague about the fact that they don't actually know. So most likely ancient Europeans just had white skin like we have white skin now. That's the most likely probability because we just don't know. So they leave that as vague as possible, purposely, while trying to hammer home random points that actually mean nothing. Like, hey, look, we found this gene. This gene that we found, it means absolutely nothing. It tells us absolutely nothing. It's like, look at this rock on the ground. Look, there's a rock. Look, a rock on the ground. Duh. And they start drooling about a rock on the ground. And because the rock is shaped in a funny way, they're like, oh, racism and white supremacy. Look, there's a rock on the ground. Rock on the ground. Racist. White supremacy. White people used to have black skin. Look, a rock on the ground. And they drool over the fucking rock. Right? That's exactly what these are scientists. These are supposed to be the smartest people on the planet that are figuring shit out. And they're literally pointing at a fucking rock on the ground and drooling and going, fart noise. Look, a rock on the ground. There's a rock on the ground. So, let's abuse white children. That's the scientists who are promoting or providing the studies, who work in the universities, like the top universities in the world. The so-called smartest people on the planet right now running the world are literally pointing out rocks on the ground and drooling and going, ha, so let's abuse white children. Ha. These are the smartest people on the planet running the universities who are determining what's correct and intelligent for the average person. They point out a random gene and they emphasize this. Again, they purposely are very vague that it means absolutely nothing. They know it means absolutely nothing. It can't tell you anything, and that means most likely white people have always been white, so we should be proud of our uniqueness. They purposely make that as vague as possible and then hammer home points of them drooling over fucking rocks on the ground. So look at the shape of that rock. That means we need to abuse white children. And that's what recent modern science is, folks. Literally for the past 10 years, every scientific article, every scientific discovery, every scientific revelation, what has it been? Retarded scientists drooling at fucking rocks on the ground and then saying, so that we should abuse white children now. So, I don't know, I personally think it's beautiful. Because we can't look at this and deny anti-whiteism. We can't look at something like this, like literally the past 10 years, pull up any scientific discovery, any scientific article for the past 10 years, maybe longer. And you're going to see them drooling over retarded anti-white points that are irrelevant to the study, simply to promote anti-whiteism and the conclusion of abusing innocent white children. And that's modern science that's taught in your universities. So for me, I think it's fucked up, it's disgusting, but in one sense, it's beautiful that it's come to this point, because now no one can deny it. No one can no longer deny it. It's so obvious and so fun, like so in your face. All right? When we have an article like this, and they start off the article by saying, "Fuck you, you white dogs. Fuck you, white people. Haha. We're going to abuse your children because, fuck you, look, a rock on the ground, and they drool over the rock and say that concludes we got to abuse and molest innocent white children. Fuck you, white man, haha." And this is a scientific article coming from scientific studies from scientists. This is modern science. Okay, folks? Again, this is what it's been for the past 10 years. But it's getting more and more obvious, more and more in your face, straight to the point. Drool over something that makes no sense whatsoever. Rock on the ground. That means we need to abuse white children and attack the white race, whiter race, Western kind from existence. So let's just pretend that we found a wisdom tooth and there was this gene, so that means maybe somehow, we'll just fucking drool over a rock on the ground. Now, 7,000 years ago, white people were actually black. Haha, fuck you, Whitey. So yeah, again, I think it's beautiful. Now we can't deny that so-called science, all recent scientific understanding, is just anti-white retardation. So the more scientific studies that come out, the more scientific articles that come out, the more correct I'm going to be proven, the more dumb cunts are going to look who want to doubt what I have to say. Beautiful. Beautiful. Because you know what? When people look back in history, they're going to read about men like me, and they're going to be nodding their heads and going, well, he was right the whole time, and all these dumb fucks just couldn't comprehend. They wouldn't listen because they were too fucking dumb. But he was right the whole time, and he kept getting proven right, and he kept getting proven right exponentially, to the point where even the most retarded people on the planet could no longer doubt that he was 100% correct. It's beautiful. I'm just going to sit here and keep being correct. Take it easy.